Hello, everyone, and welcome to Parents Inform Yosef Mental Wellbeing. Throughout this one-hour program, we will be discussing topics and strategies for talking with your student about mental well-being. We have included some helpful links that we have sent in the previous email that we will make reference to during this webinar. Let me start by saying a thank you for everyone joining in. To begin, I'm Caroline Yonkers. I'm a marketing student and an intern here at Wellness and Prevention Services. First, Dr. Alex Howard. Dr. Howard is the Director of Wellness and Prevention Services and holds his Master's and Doctorate of Public Health from the University of Kentucky. Secondly, Ben Asma. Ben is the Assistant Director and Substance Abuse Counselor at Wellness and Prevention. He graduated with his Master's in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Appalachian, along with postmaster's certificates in both addiction counseling and expressive arts therapy. Thirdly, Elizabeth Cavallero. Elizabeth is the coordinator for student mental wellness here at App State. She holds her Master's of Public Health from the University of North Florida. Lastly, Alan Rasmussen. Alan graduated with degrees in psychology and anthropology from App State. He completed his master's degree in clinical mental health counseling at Antioch University. He is the Assistant Dean of Students. And Allison Dodson is the Director of Parent and Family Services. Throughout this webinar, you will have the ability to ask live questions dealing with these topics that we will be discussing. Please direct your questions toward Dr. Alex Howard, and we will answer them as quickly as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you to everyone that's joining us today for our second iteration of Parents Inform Yourself. Very exciting for all of us here on campus, within the department and outside, many of our collaborators. I'm really excited to have Alan join us today, our first featured guest from outside of the department, joining us from the Dean of Students Office, who we work very closely with. So speaking of which, the Dean of Students Office represents a unit here on campus that I like to describe as the bridge. Really connects students with resources, support services, so on and so forth around campus and off campus. And I always direct parents, guardians, students, and all stakeholders to, if you have questions or concerns, your Dean of Students should be your first stop. That office really is equipped with handling a number of inquiries and questions and concerns. So that being said, their phone number, 828-262-8284. Again, the phone number for the Dean of Students Office is 828-262-8284. Last Parents Inform Yourself activity, I gave a description of our Department of Wellness and Prevention Services. So I'll quickly highlight our services again. We have 5 primary services here in terms of how we support our students. They include substance use and abuse, nutritional counseling, sexual health, mental health and well-being, which is the topic of today's discussion, and interpersonal violence and sexual assault prevention. Phone number here at the Department of Wellness and Prevention Services, 828-262-3148. Again, that's 828-262-3148. The other office I want to highlight regarding its role and significance to providing support services related to mental health is our Counseling and Psychological Services Department, which is overseen by Dr. Chris Hogan. The phone number there is 828-262-3180. Again, that's 828-262-3180. Counseling and Psychological Services is responsible for overseeing the bulk of mental health therapeutic services provided to our students, as well as interfacing with offices such as Wellness and Prevention and the Dean of Students Office in creating a care plan and coordinated approach to better supporting our students. If you have questions or concerns about any of those offices and units, do not hesitate to contact any of us. I am going to hand the mic off to Mr. Rasmussen and allow him to provide a little detail on the Dean of Students Office and his role and what we see in terms of our students and the scope of mental health on our campus.
Good afternoon. We appreciate y'all being here. We always have time to connect directly with parents. I really value the time to connect when there's not a crisis happening or there's not something significant going on. But oftentimes, that's how we get connected in the Dean of Students Office initially. Our role in the Dean of Students Office primarily is out of care and concern to help students navigate significant or minor situations as they're navigating their journey here at Appalachian. We have a lot of doors we can open, and I say often we do not always have the right answers, but we try to help students get to the right place as quickly as possible. If we can cut down the number of hoops a student has to jump through to find resources and support, that would be our goal. One of the first ways we tend to get connected with families would be during a medical incident or loss of a family member or something along those lines. Most of the time, faculty or family want to know how to reach out to professors. And we have what's called a faculty notification page on our website. That's deanofstudents.appstate.edu. Under forms, you can click on class absence notification, and it's a way to submit the documentation and allow the process to begin for us to notify students, faculty should something occur. We have a lot of ways to do this. We do require documentation, but it helps open the doors to formally let faculty know what's going on for a student at any given time. Like I said, that's often the first place that we connect, but we get a lot of phone calls around, I've heard this, or I believe my student's doing this. We want to get involved whenever a family member or somebody's concerned about a student or notices a change or knows that a student's navigating something significant, even not here at Appalachian. We have a vast resource supply that we want to connect students to in any number of ways, but we take it in a very individual way. So we work with students as directly as possible to help figure out what they need and how we connect them with the right resources both on and off campus. So if you think about the Dean of Students Office, as Dr. Howard shared earlier, think of it as kind of that initial place to go when you don't know where else to turn. If you're running into roadblocks and you can't figure out where to go next, give us a call. Even our student workers at the front desk are pretty good at navigating initial concerns, and if not, they know who to send it to afterwards. And that's where you and I can get into a dialogue to figure out what your student may need and where to go from here. Again, our whole role here is to open up doors for resources and supports for students as they're navigating any number of things. A lot of that can tend to be mental health concerns and connections to resources both on and off campus that way, medication concerns, what students are going into the counseling center for or wellness and prevention office for. They may need other resources in place while this is happening or things are changing. We work with the Office of Disability Services. We connect with student health services in any number of ways because, again, our role would be to bridge the concerns to help a student's path to success be realized as quickly as possible. So I look forward to your questions, and hopefully the dialogue with what comes next can open up more opportunity in that way for us to share what we have.
Thank you, Alan. We are now going to ask Ms. Cavallero, who is our coordinator of student mental wellness here in the office, if she will provide a brief description of her role here in wellness and prevention services and how she interfaces and supports students regarding their mental well-being.
Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth. So what I do here is, as a coordinator for student mental wellness, one of the things I'm in charge of is our suicide prevention programming. So I do our in-person trainings. I have created an online training as well. And what that training does is it teaches peers, faculty, staff, the warning signs for suicide, so what to look for, and then how you respond if you notice those warning signs in someone in your network, and how do you make that referral to a professional. So it's really getting people to reach out and help those who might be struggling, so our students don't have to struggle alone. I also coordinate our mindfulness work, so that is a 4-week class that our students can take. Up to 13 students can register for the class at a time, and I teach them various different mindfulness and meditation skills to help them self-soothe, de-stress, and self-regulate their own emotions. And so hopefully trying to get less students experiencing a lot of overwhelming things if they're able to regulate it themselves and self-soothe. And I also advise our peer coaches, and those are students who have been trained in motivational interview skills to work with their peers who are struggling with more lower level things. So if they're trying to figure out stress management tools or time management, or just want to know how to connect with other people on campus, they're transfer students and they're having some trouble adjusting, if they're homesick, whatever some lower level things are, they can meet with a peer who can talk through goal setting and taking action steps to address whatever issues they might be having, and can also connect them to other resources if needed. So that's a little bit about how I engage with our students here on campus.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to ask Ben Asma, who serves as our assistant director here in the office, if he'll speak a little bit to some of the client trends he sees in his role as our primary substance abuse counselor here on campus and in our office, and how that influences, or excuse me, is connected to many of the other factors and elements that we see that oftentimes exacerbate or heighten some of the mental health concerns seen on campus.
Okay. I was waiting to be unmuted. Hello, everyone. So yeah, when we're thinking about substance use and how that comes into play with our students, it's not uncommon that on college campuses, there is the risk for substance use, whether that's alcohol, marijuana, or other illicit substances. Something that we need to be aware of is that it can be normalized a whole lot more than what actually exists. So for students who are constantly finding themselves experiencing trouble, legal issues, and mental health concerns as a result of substance use is by far not the norm on campus. But when it does exist, it is pretty high risk and most definitely inhibits one's experience while in college as well as one's success. And it also adds to a lot of familial strain because of all the issues that follow suit. So when we think about substance use, there's a lot of reasons that people use substances, but primarily there's 4 reasons. When we think about those reasons, the first one would be emotional reasons. So if I'm sad, or if I'm angry, or if I'm happy, or whatever my emotional experience is, causes me to use, then that would be based on an emotional reason. There's social reasons. That's how I socialize. That's how I get along with my friends. That's what I do when I go out. That would classify as social. There's cognitive. So if I use a substance and I say it helps me focus, it helps me function, it helps me be creative, whatever the outcome is, but that would be focused on cognitive. So far we have emotional, social, cognitive, and the 4th one would be physical. And so this is when we really get into dependence. And so if we are so dependent on a substance that we begin to have physical withdrawals or negative physical symptoms as a result of not using, that causes us to continue to use substances, that would be physical. So those 4 reasons are the reasons we use substances. And sometimes they can be for a very positive reason. If I'm socializing, having a drink or so, but I'm not experiencing any negative consequences, that would be considered a low risk and or more healthy relationship with the substance. When it starts to take away from our priorities, starts to take away from our goals and our purpose of being in the university setting, that's when we start to determine that there is a negative relationship with our substance or substance use behavior. So some ways that can kind of counteract our success while in school is that if we are experiencing any sort of negative emotional feeling, symptoms of depression and symptoms of anxiety are very common for everyone who exists in this life. When they get to a very severe level, sometimes we need medication and a lot more significant treatment to help battle through those conditions. However, it is very common that your student will experience symptoms of depression and anxiety while they're in school. Alcohol, drug use only exacerbates those symptoms. The challenge is that in the moment, it feels like it actually is helping. If I'm drinking alcohol as a result of experiencing depression, for that brief period of time, that depression will likely go away. And so it feels like the alcohol is working and that it's helping. However, in the long run, it typically causes more symptoms of depression, and it causes our problems to persist at a much longer and more significant rate than had we not been drinking to soothe in the first place. So when Elizabeth was talking about some of our efforts to really teach students how to self-soothe, that's what we're getting at. We're wanting to really help students understand how to self-soothe and take care of their mental well-being in order to prevent using substances in place of very natural and organic methods that we are capable of doing as human beings. So that's pretty much the substance use in a nutshell around mental well-being. Some other things to be thinking about is if substance use continues to persist at a level that we experience these negative consequences, it does catch up with us, and it takes away our time, it takes away our relationships, it takes away from our sleep, it takes away from our diet, our exercise. So it might not be directly the cause of everything, but indirectly and through other direct methods, it does take away from our well-being, and it takes away from our natural resiliency that we've developed over time, or prevents us from developing more resiliency moving forward. So if you have those conversations, and I do encourage you to have those conversations with your students to get an understanding on why they use substances if they do, and how they assess to determine what is an appropriate amount and what is an appropriate relationship with the substance, so that it does not interfere with their goals while here at school.
Thank you, Ben. Got a couple of questions that have come in. Just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, please feel free to type them into the Zoom group chat. And as we receive them, we will disseminate them to the appropriate parties, or open them up to the entire group of hosts here to discuss. First question is regarding a student who has a history of mental health concerns, and the parent wants to know how might they create a proactive plan of action to ensure that their student is successful here at Appalachian. I'm going to ask Alan if he'll jump in on that question and provide some insight from his experience.
The best part about that question is the proactive nature. That really opens up a lot of doors for us to figure out what we can do to step in. And it may not be stepping in. It may be what I talk about is how do we put the net in place to make sure if something does pop up, we've got some things covered and the right resources and connections set up before we begin. It's really individualized. There's any number of things that we could look at to put in place depending on a student's history. Some of the first things we ask are, has it been recommended from a previous therapist that they continue therapy while here at Appalachian? If that's the case, we want to look at what those options may be, either through our counseling center or off-campus clinicians. We also wonder if there been any medication management in the past, and if that's the case, do we need to work on getting a connection to student health services, or is a student going to continue to see a provider at home? There are some challenges with resources up here in Western North Carolina. We have one psychiatrist on our campus, and we have 4 other doctors and 4 other nurse practitioners that can prescribe. But as far as psychiatry goes, we have a limited number of openings and availability for students to start new medication tracks or to be medication monitored in that way. So we can tend, depending on what's going on with the student and what their connections are from clinicians or prescribers back home, we can try to balance what the student's needs may be. Again, when we look at the individualized component, we talk about has it impacted their academics, or has in the past, or could it impact their academics? What kinds of supports have worked for them? Is it an isolation factor where we need to talk about clubs or organizations? It's really looking at past history as what has popped up for concern for that student, and then working towards what's available to them here, and how do we reach and establish those connections before anything were to happen. If they are working on seasonal or navigating seasonal depression, we need to know that and can be proactive in how we're making sure the connections are in place before. If they have a history of anxiety that's impacted in the classroom, we may look at getting connected to the Office of Disability Services so that an accommodation plan could be in place to help them navigate should anything come up down the road. Again, it's very individualized depending on what the student's needs may be, and that's where a connection to the Dean of Students office could be a really good starting point, where we get to sit down with the student, and if they choose with the family involved too, and talk about what their history's been, what their concerns are, where their concern red flags may come up, and then where we can go to build that bridge connection in with any number of avenues to support them on their journey. Again, the idea being that even that face-to-face meeting can be very important, because we want them to know that they don't have to navigate this alone, that there's people here, there are people here that can help establish those connections and resources. And the more face-to-face contact they have with resources and support, the more likely a student may be to reach out for those supports should they need them down the road.
All right, thank you, Alan. I have another question here. It speaks to a student disclosing a concern regarding mental health, and how should I, as a parent or guardian, engage them in that conversation after they have disclosed concern? I'm going to ask Elizabeth if she would jump in on this question.
Okay, so one thing you can do if you're trying to start a conversation with the student about their mental health is use the model that is taught in our suicide prevention training. It is taught on how to talk to someone about suicide, but in general, it's a really good model to talk about mental health in general. And that training will be sent out to you all afterwards. You'll be able to access it, but I'll give you a brief overview of what each step is. So the acronym we use is APPS. It's APPS. The A stands for approach and acknowledge. So you want to approach the student being very specific about why you're concerned. So instead of saying, hey, how are things going? How are you doing? Say more about, hey, you mentioned this thing that is concerning. Would you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or I've noticed that it seems like you've been really stressed out lately, or you're sleeping a lot, or staying up really late, and I'm just wondering how things are going. So just being really specific about what you've noticed, because in general, how are you, just checking in will usually result in a I'm fine, don't worry about it. But if you're specific about why you're concerned, it'll be a little harder for the person to shut you down, because you can follow up even more on those questions. But you also want to acknowledge that it's going to be a potentially awkward conversation, and that there might be points in the conversation where you yourself, as the one initiating the conversation, might feel uncomfortable. There might be awkward moments of silence, and just know that that's a normal part of the conversation, and you're not doing anything wrong if that happens, that it might be awkward, but that it's still a worthwhile conversation to have. The first P in the acronym stands for probe, so asking questions. This is a conversation where you want to be spending a lot more time listening and less time giving advice. So you're really just trying to figure out what is really going on with the student and listening from that compassionate, understanding, caring place. Really making sure that as you're asking questions, as the person is answering you, you're turning off that side of you that's trying to judge them, and also turning off that side of you that might be immediately wanting to fix everything. And because when you, if like, let's say a student is sleeping a lot and you say, well, you need to wake up early, there might be a deeper issue than them just not being able, just them wanting to sleep all the time, and they might feel like you're judging them and not want to continue talking more about whatever's going on. So really turning off that side of you that wants to fix everything for a little bit, and really just trying to gain a better understanding of what the student's going through. How are you sleeping? How are you eating? How are you feeling in general? Can you tell me about your friends? How are classes going? Have you joined any clubs? Just asking questions, and then based on what they're saying, getting more specific and more deeper and deeper. And eventually, if you think it's to the level of suicide, asking about suicide directly. But if it's not to the level of suicide, asking about whatever your concern is about directly, not trying to skirt around that, really asking up front, because you don't know the answer unless you ask. The next P is promoting hope, and that again has to do with continuing to listen. If they self-disclose an issue, not immediately rushing to make that referral, but giving them time to talk about why they're struggling, and letting them know that you are there for them, that you are not going to abandon them, that you're not going to judge them for feeling the way that they're feeling. And then once you've let them know that you are really an ally in this, that you really do care, then sharing the referrals. And the referrals are, of course, going to be a little bit different depending on what they might be struggling with. The counseling center is available even over the upcoming Thanksgiving break, and even over winter break. There will be counselors on call that you can call if you're concerned, or the student can call. If you're needing to get local resources related to mental health specifically in your area during the breaks, you can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which might seem a little scary because they're often couched as a crisis line, but they also have a database of just local resources related to whatever mental health concern your student might be going through. So they're a really great resource to call and just get what's available in your area. The keys are, in my opinion, really to be specific about what you're noticing, really turn on the listening, part of things, and also being honest. So if you say, I'm not going to judge you, make sure that you actually mean it. So whatever you're communicating to that student, being honest about it, not saying what you think you should say, but really saying what you can commit to doing. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. If you have questions about the APPS acronym that Elizabeth went over, or just general questions after the webinar, we'll make additional resources available and share contact information with you again as well. So anything that we discussed today that you still have some questions about, don't worry, we will make sure you are well informed of where the resources are and how to get in touch with us as well. I have another question here that asks about the trends we see at Appalachian and are they unique to App State? Well, one of the wonderful things about what we are seeing is we know we are not unique in terms of what's happening here on our campus. And I say that because it would be a very frightening situation if we were in a unique situation in terms of the heightened reports that we are seeing year in and year out, the number of cases, the severity, so on and so forth. This is a national trend in terms of the more than 50% of students reporting during the last year having recurring overwhelming anxiety, and probably a third of students indicating that during that time span, they experience recurring and overwhelming depression. Again, these are stats that are pretty similar to what's seen across the nation in terms of the prevalence of anxiety, being at a higher rate than depression, so on and so forth. What we have recognized here at App State, roughly 5 to 7% of students indicate that at some point in the previous year, they've had ideas of suicide or making attempts, so on and so forth. And again, that trends well with colleges and universities across the country also. So we're not unique in what we see. That being said, though, I think there are some factors that we do monitor. Alan spoke to it earlier a little bit when we talk about the seasons here in the mountains and what that represents for our students. As many of you know, seasonal affective disorder is a real thing. And here in northwestern North Carolina, as winter approaches and begins to settle in, it gets gray here and it stays gray for some time. And so it's dark, it's cold, and that oftentimes impacts our emotional well-being and our mental well-being as well. So just as encouragement to your student, again, reinforcing what Elizabeth has already mentioned, check in, ask questions. Classes, are you engaged socially and within your community? Are you still finding fulfillment in your day-to-day and weekly activities as a student here at Appalachian? So do that general check-in, particularly during the winter when it is often a trying time up here. So another question that I think Ben may be equipped to respond to. So Ben, I'm a parent. I want to engage and I would love to actually be a part of a session. Is that acceptable, and how might I go about that process if I want to join my student in a session with their mental health professional?
Well, one, yes, most definitely that is available. We do encourage parents to come if they want to join in with their student to discuss what that proactive plan may look like. So if that's wanted, all they need to do is to have the student call us, schedule that appointment, and they can let us know if their parent or guardian is going to show up and participate. During that time, we would ask that a release of information be signed so that we just have confirmation from the student that they agree and are open to a parent joining that session. During that time, what may be discussed is what has been going on, what is going on, and what the goals are moving forward, and how both the family support system as well as the individual student and their experience here on campus can work together and simultaneously be on the same path to the level of success that they are seeking. So yeah, most definitely, we do encourage parents to engage as much as possible, while also hoping that parents will allow students to figure things out on their own as they are, say, becoming these young adults in our school system. So we really want to encourage the appropriate level of support. Not too much to where we take all ownership and accountability off the student, but enough so that the student knows they're going to be supported as well as held accountable for their decisions and well-being while here at the university. Just one more thing that I would add would be in those conversations, something that I really like to propose to both parents as well as students is the idea of reflection. Oftentimes we're here at school, we're here in life making all these decisions and we're thinking about what's going to be best going into a situation. But we often find that little time is spent on the reflection of the actions and behaviors that have actually already taken place. And that's where some of the best learning can really exist. Most of our students, they're going to make mistakes. I'm a big encourager of mistakes, hopefully not the high risk ones, hopefully not the ones that lead to the worst possible outcomes, but those natural mistakes that we make in this process of life that give us a lot of valuable information. That's, where our wisdom comes from, is the reflection on these mistakes and life decisions. So with the idea of reflection, it can be an ongoing conversation with parents, with families, between friends. And so the idea is that students go through their life, but they spend time at the end of each day really reflecting on their decisions. When it comes to substance use, it would be reflecting on, okay, did I get what I wanted out of it? If I did, great. And if not, then what might I do differently next time? Maybe they need to come and talk to me so they get an understanding on how alcohol interacts with their body. Maybe they need to have a different conversation with somebody else. That's just one example of substance use, but that exists throughout all decisions that students make. And if we can really encourage this idea of reflection, then over the course of time, they're not acting on just whims and unthought out decisions. They're really using their wisdom of what they've been through and helping them, sustain this life of wise decision making and using their wisdom that they've gained along the way.
Thank you, Ben. I've got another question. Speaks to what is the best way to coordinate between health services, the Office of Disability Services, and housing? Is there a hierarchy to follow to avoid confusion that might also lead to a heightening of anxiousness within a student? I'm going to ask Alan if he'll jump in on this question.
That's a great question. And I think one thing to keep in mind, actually probably another reason why I have a job, is we have a pretty large network here at Appalachian, and it can be hard to navigate multiple components, especially if a student is registered or connected to any number of places, especially the ones listed in that question. Some of the challenges with this are the Counseling Center, Student Health Services, Office of Disability Services, they are all confidential places for a student to go that are holding information in that way. So it can be hard to begin to figure out where the bridges are. If a student's connected to the Office of Disability Services, but there are housing accommodations, maybe a student has a single bedroom for any number of reasons, or has an emotional support animal, whatever it may be, there has to be some pretty direct dialogue and language between the offices. But for the offices to speak to each other, the students have to sign releases of information from the Student Health Services area and from the Office of Disability Services area. University housing is not a confidential entity. They're there to work with accommodations given through Office of Disability Services. If a student's been navigating things through Student Health Services, it would probably be on the student to let housing know what may be going on. Student Health Services doesn't typically speak directly to housing. If there's a bigger concern or it's complex, that's where the Office of Dean of Students can come into play and begin to bridge the networks in that way. It is challenging in that I can walk a student to the Counseling Center, or I can walk them to Student Health Services. I can walk them into the room and leave, but then I can call back and those offices will neither confirm or deny that a student, that they know a student, unless a direct release of information is given for that to happen. That's the same with Ben Asthma here in Wellness and Prevention. When there's a license involved from a medical or mental health standpoint, or they're navigating things through the Office of Disability Services by abiding through the America's Disabilities Act, there has to be the appropriate confidentiality and releases in place in order for everybody to talk to each other. And that, again, that's where the Dean of Students office can come in, maybe a case manager there, or any number of us in that office can open up doors to say, well, it sounds like this is complicated. This is what you need to ask for a release to open up this dialogue and allow everybody to speak to each other in a more appropriate pattern. That can be a challenging thing for a student to do as well. Oftentimes, learning to advocate for yourself can be one of the biggest tasks and lifelong lessons that we all go through, but especially at this college age where it falls to them to do any number of things. And that's why we want to help them through this process and make sure that students realize that they don't have to go through it alone, especially with the complexities of confidentiality. So I guess in answer to that question, if there are challenges to those 3 resources or offices on campus, I would ask that student come into the Dean of Students office and let us try to get the big picture view of what's going on and how do we help streamline some of that communication line.
Thank you, Alan. Have a question regarding mental health screening and what resources we have available here on campus. I'm going to ask Elizabeth if she will reply to this question.
So here at App, we're lucky to have a pretty good screening program. If a student is interested in taking a screening, or you're interested in having your student take a screening, they can go to counseling.appstate.edu. On the side, they'll see a little image that says, how are you feeling? If you click that, you'll be taken to a screening website where you can take multiple anonymous screenings. So what's nice about this is that the student can take the screening knowing that it's not going to be reported who they are. So it's really up to them then to make the decision about what resources to get, but it's not like there's going to be any immediate reaction when they take that screening. So that anonymous factor has really made it so that a lot of students feel more comfortable taking the screening. And they can take screenings on a lot of different topics: depression, anxiety, eating disorder, resiliency, alcohol use, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, and substance use. So if they're concerned about any of those things, they can go online and take a screening. And what that screening does is it scores them, and then it advises them on what they should do for next steps. So you've scored low on this, you probably don't need to take any next steps, versus you've scored highly, it's recommended that you reach out to these resources. And I believe that it does list actual resources on our campus that they can then decide to reach out to.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have another question with us. It asks, my student has talked about taking time off due to a mental health concern. Is this possible, and what is the process? Alan, do you mind taking that one?
This is a very common question, actually, and it's really dependent upon what the path is for the student. At any given time, there are options for withdrawal for any term, summer or fall or spring. We would want to look at the situation at hand to see what's going on and try to mitigate any impact that may be out there, either financially, academically, what it might look like. Part of our role in the Dean of Students office would be to sit with the student having these kinds of considerations, to lay out all the hypothetical paths, and then we support the student's decisions that they make with their family. We don't make those decisions for the student. We can advise and we can share what we've seen and patterns of behavior and how it's impacted students in the past, but it's a really individualized path that a student would choose if they're trying to take time off. There are some differences if a student's trying to take time off in the middle of the term, so they are looking for withdrawal, or if they're looking to finish a term and not come back for a semester. They all look a little bit different, but this is where we work hand in hand with the registrar's office. And from a policy standpoint, that is a great place to start to talk about what the withdrawal policies are, what the avenues might be in that way. And the registrar's office phone number is 828-262-2050. We coordinate with that office, and we explain a lot of the resources and supports. And if a student is taking time off, either in term or out of term, if they've completed one and they're just not coming back, we have the ability to still set a student up with resources back home. And we would want them to know that if they're going to take some time off from Appalachian, that we want them to work on some of the things that were more challenging for them while they were in term. So we want them to come back and be the best student that they know that they can be. We just have to be able to figure out how we are combining the right resources and supports to allow that to happen. I tell students all the time that if they're going to choose to take some time off, that it's not really time off, that we need to develop a good plan to help them move forward again, so when they come back, they are ready to be the best student they can. So I work with students that aren't even currently enrolled. If they're taking that time off and they tell me they want to come back to Appalachian, I will always take their phone call or take their email and see what we can do to find resources and support. We have somebody in our counseling center whose job is information and referrals, and they will help students even if they're in Raleigh, even if they're in Phoenix. If they're home and they decide now's the time I need to get connected to resources for mental health concerns or substance abuse treatment, we have somebody designated to help figure out what those resources are in that community, based on insurance and based on need and what students want to work towards. So again, if a student's going to take some time off, we want to look at how we help them do that in the most appropriate fashion, as well as mitigate any academic or financial impact that could have, as well as look for what that path might be for them to get better. And what better may be, we don't know, but we want to help them find that path. Again, we don't drive the train, but we can lay out all the options to allow the student and their family to make the best decisions for them going forward.
Thank you, Alan. We have another question, which may actually be our final one for today's session. Ben, I think this question is probably best suited for you. The question is, my student was connected with counseling, but has since stopped their sessions. Why do students disengage, and how does app then handle these situations? So Ben, if you don't mind jumping in on that one for us.
So let me just make sure I have the question straight. Kind of broke up for a second. Why do students disengage, and then how can they be reconnected?
That's it.
Okay. So sometimes students disengage for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's because counseling, like any other relationship, or like any other relationship, it's exactly that. It's a relationship. So if Alan is my counselor and, we really just don't see eye to eye, we really don't connect well, that's probably going to steer me away from wanting to stay connected with him as my counselor. And that's okay. The goal as a counselor is we tell students, if that's the case, then let's talk about that up front prior to disengagement. Therefore, I can help get him connected, or he can help get me connected to another counselor, one that might be more of a fit. So sometimes it's purely that I really don't connect well with my counselor, and it just doesn't feel good. And that alone really can hinder the counseling process. So we have a lot of counselors in the counseling center. We have a lot of folks here in Wellness and Prevention who provide counseling services, as well as other counselors on this campus in a lot of different counseling capacities. So the hope is that we will find somebody who connects well with you, whether it's on campus, in the community, somewhere, we're going to find that good fit. And that makes a huge difference, oftentimes more than the style or technique of counseling that's taking place. Other reasons people disengage is life just gets pretty busy. And counseling is a slow process. It's not a quick fix. In this world of immediate gratification, we all want something so fast and we want it to happen overnight. In counseling, one of the outcomes we usually see in counseling is that things actually start to feel like they're getting worse before they get better, because we really start to open up the wounds and really start to address the reality of our situation. And when we take that all into account, sometimes it seems like it's actually harder for us. But that's the counseling process, is we really dig into that wound and we open up and see what our situation is. We make sense of it, and then we determine a plan of moving forward and addressing how we heal or how we get past our challenges. So the disengagement can come from, a lack of seeing progress without the understanding that sometimes progress is taking place even if we're not aware of it. Some other reasons the students disengage, it could be just purely their schedule. It could be forgetting that they had an appointment, and then they miss an appointment. They miss 2 appointments. They're kind of scared. They're embarrassed about calling and saying, like, hey, I missed my appointment. This happens to me all the time. Like, I run into a student, they're like, oh my goodness, I would love to set up another appointment. I'm so sorry I missed my last one. we completely understand that life happens. We don't encourage students to no-show. We really appreciate that if there's going to be a cancellation, that you give us a call, let us know. We worry about our students. We want to make sure everybody's okay. But if you miss an appointment and that's the reason you're not following up and coming back for services, we want to challenge that belief and say, life happens, and we're human too. So we're going to meet you where you are. And if you missed an appointment, we're going to be okay with that. We want you to come back and get connected. But I really can't even think about how many times that has happened, that purely because somebody missed one appointment, they never showed back up out of embarrassment or feeling that they were going to be judged for some reason. Those are some of the main reasons that students disengage. And the easiest ways to get reconnected is really give us a call, walk in. We are here because we want to help our students. We want to serve our students in the best capacity that we can. And in doing so, that's meeting where they're at. That's allowing them to be human. That's allowing them to grow up and make mistakes and hopefully learn from whatever caused them to maybe miss that first appointment. We can help address those issues so that they won't miss another one. So that's pretty much what I got on disengagement. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Alan? You may have some ideas.
I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. We hear all kinds of stories, but there's often a lot of pattern to what students are saying and doing in that way. And I think embarrassment and frustration, and sometimes they feel like everything's great now. I can just walk away. And the biggest part is how do we help them see the big picture of what it means and to follow through with a treatment plan. And if there are any decisions making for leaving or disengaging, are you in accordance with your counselor? Have you talked it through? Do you know what it means? Do you know how to re-engage when you're ready? There's just so much dialogue around coming and going, but it's also part of the therapeutic process. And I think, that's part of a good counselor too, to talk about it up front. But counseling can also be one of those areas where, it doesn't always have to be right to get into counseling, but a student has to be committed to it. And we talk a lot about just planting seeds. And maybe those first 2 sessions did plant a seed that this is realistic, but they just weren't ready at that point in time. We hope that that's a good experience for them. So when they are ready to come back and they're at a better place, or they're more open to engage in the therapeutic process, that can be a little bit more successful. If they're not engaged at counseling, or they disengage from counseling or from student health services or their local clinicians, we still want to make sure that they have the right resources and supports too. So if a family member hears that, their son or daughter just stopped counseling or just dropped it off, we don't have a problem reaching out to that student to say, hey, we spoke to your guardian, or we spoke to your parent or your grandmother, and we learned that you're going through some things and that maybe you've stopped counseling. I just want to make sure you know all the resources and supports available to you. Come on in, let's chat, and let's make sure things are going okay, and let's see where we can go from there. So we want to help and engage the student and meet them where they are in this process as much as we can. Is that fair, Ben?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. And I just brought up one idea, that re-engagement process. One thing I talk about with the students that I work with is developing this self-awareness, this ability to assess yourself. In the counseling relationship, I know how to work with an individual, but I will never be the expert on that individual. That's the individual's role, and they will always know themselves best. So in that assessment piece, we want to encourage students that you can feel a lot better from counseling, and then you can say disengage, and that's completely appropriate. But that does not mean that life's going to be perfect for the next, say, 3.5 years while you're in college. And so I think about it like a car. I go into the shop, I get my tires changed, I get my brakes fixed, and I'm good for a few months. But a few months later, I might start to hear a squeaking. I might lose a tail light, and it's the same metaphor that happens in our personal human life. And so when I start to maybe notice my anxiety's coming back a little bit, or maybe my symptoms of depression are heightening, that's a good thing to be aware of. And the ability to have that awareness is that's the number one step. And at that point in time, it would be appropriate to re-engage and to make that connection with the counselor you worked with before. That's not a sign of failure. That is a sign of significant growth and just accepting reality for what it is. So that re-engagement piece is really important. And I would really propose to parents to have that conversation with the students, that life is just this constant cycle of learning. And within that learning, there's going to be a lot of hardship, but that's not a problem. That's a good thing to address.
Thank you. If there are any final questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat box. But as of now, we will be wrapping up. So thank you all so much for logging on to the second annual webinar for Parents Inform Yosef series. If you have any further questions, please email Dr. Alex Howard, and that's howardaf@appstate.edu. We look forward to continuing these twice again in the spring semester. So thank you so much.